They took her badge, handed her a cardboard box, and told her she was finished. After 20 years of saving lives, Nurse Meline Jenkins was fired for frustrating protocol. The fluorescent lights of the Human Resources Office at St. Jude's Memorial Hospital hummed with a sharp, relentless buzz, the kind that crawled under the skin and refused to leave. Meline sat on the edge of a gray, fabric-covered chair that smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, knuckles white, trying to hide the slight tremor running through them. These hands had started IVs and moving ambulances. These hands had pressed down on bleeding chests, counted compressions, steadied panicked parents, and held the wrists of patients as their heartbeats returned. But here, under buzzing lights and polite cruelty, they felt useless. Across from her sat Dr. Marcus Sterling, chief of surgery. His white coat was immaculate, his posture relaxed, his expression faintly amused. He wore his stethoscope like jewelry, not a tool. Beside him was Linda Holloway, the HR director, her manicured fingernail tapping a manila folder as if the paper itself were on trial. Insubordination, Linda said flatly, eyes never lifting from the page. Gross misconduct, violation of hospital hierarchy. Meline swallowed. The air tasted recycled and antiseptic. "I saved the patient," she said, her voice low but steady. "Leo is alive. If I hadn't administered the epinephrine when I did..." Dr. Sterling shifted in his chair. "You undermined my authority," he said smoothly. "You are a nurse, Meline. A highly paid, perhaps overqualified nurse, but a nurse nonetheless. You do not make decisions. You execute orders." "I created a heartbeat," Meline snapped, the restraint cracking at last. "His throat was closing. He was turning blue while you were on the phone with legal." "That is enough," Linda interrupted, finally looking up. Her eyes were empty of sympathy. "The decision has been made." She slid the folder forward. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Your system access has already been revoked. Security will escort you to your locker." The silence that followed pressed down like weight on her chest. Meline looked at Sterling. He gave her a small, satisfied smile. The smile of a man who had never been told no and never expected to be. "You're making a mistake," Meline whispered. "The only mistake," Sterling said, standing and buttoning his pristine coat, "was thinking you were indispensable." The walk to her locker felt like a funeral procession for her own life. 20 years. She had started at St. Jude's at 25, idealistic and exhausted and proud to wear the scrubs. She had survived pandemics, budget cuts, understaffing, and endless night shifts. She knew every hallway, every face, every sound of that hospital. Now it ended with a cardboard box, a stethoscope, a chipped mug that read, "Nurses call the shots," a framed photo of her late husband, Mark. 2 decades of service reduced to something that barely filled her arms. And then the doors closed behind her. Just like that. She was no longer a nurse at St. Jude's Memorial Hospital. The rain hit her the moment the automatic door slid shut behind her. Cold, sharp, unapologetic. Meline Jenkins stood on the sidewalk outside St. Jude's Memorial Hospital as the October drizzle soaked through her scrubs, plastering damp strands of hair against her forehead. She hugged the cardboard box to her chest, angling it instinctively to shield the framed photo inside from the rain. Mark's smile stared up at her through the glass, frozen in a moment that felt like it belonged to another lifetime. She didn't have her car. It was still in the shop, waiting for a transmission repair she could no longer afford. 6 blocks to the train station. That was the only plan she had. She took her first step, sneakers squelching against the wet pavement. The sound felt embarrassingly loud, like the city itself was mocking her. 20 years of routine had trained her body to move with purpose, to hurry, to be somewhere important. Now she walked slowly, uncertain, with nowhere she actually needed to be. The city of Chicago flowed around her, indifferent to the collapse happening inside her chest. Taxis sped past, spraying dirty water onto the curb. Businessmen hurried by under umbrellas, eyes glued to glowing screens and ticking watches. No one looked at her twice. No one noticed a woman in blue scrubs clutching a box like it was the last solid thing left in her life. She replayed the meeting again and again. Insubordination, hostile work environment, violation of hierarchy. The words looped in her head, stacking on top of each other until they blurred into something hollow and cruel. Her grip tightened around the box as her thoughts drifted back to the trauma bay, back to the boy. Leo, 8 years old, gasping, hands clawing at his throat. She could still see his face turning that terrifying shade of blue, still hear his mother screaming his name. Dr. Sterling hesitated, eyes darting between the chart and the phone, debating dosage and liability like time was negotiable. Meline had seen the moment the light started fading from Leo's eyes. She hadn't thought, she had moved. She'd pushed the epinephrine, the gasp, the rush of air, the miracle. Alive. Her sneakers slowed as she crossed the bridge over the Chicago River. Gray water churned beneath her, matching the heaviness in her chest. Rain dotted the surface in endless ripples, each one vanishing as quickly as they formed. Maybe I should have waited, she thought bitterly. Maybe I should have let him handle it. She shook her head, even as doubt crept in. Years of conditioning whispered that she'd crossed the line, that she'd forgotten her place. Maybe I'm just an old, stubborn nurse. Maybe I don't know when to shut up. That thought hurt more than the firing. She reached the far end of the bridge, the hospital now 3 blocks behind her. With every step away from it, the weight of the box seemed to grow greater, as if it carried not just her belongings, but every night shift, every life saved, every sacrifice she made. She was unemployed. She was alone. And for the first time since she put on scrubs at 25 years old, Meline Jenkins had absolutely nowhere she was expected to be. The rain kept falling. So did she. Quietly, on the inside. At first, Meline thought it was thunder. A low, distant rumble rolled through the air, subtle enough that her exhausted mind almost ignored it. The rain continued to fall, soft but steady, tapping against concrete and glass. She took another step forward, then stopped. The sound deepened. It wasn't random. It had rhythm. The pavement beneath her feet vibrated faintly, just enough for her to feel it through the thin soles of her sneakers. Small puddles along the sidewalk began to ripple, circles spreading outward as if something massive was approaching from above. The glass windows of the storefronts lining the street started to rattle, a nervous clinking that raised a hair on her back neck. Meline looked up. The gray clouds hanging low over Chicago seemed to tear apart, shredded by an invisible force. A shadow passed overhead, then another. The noise grew louder, no longer a sound, but a pressure, pushing against her chest and making it hard to breathe. People around her slowed, confused. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A cyclist skidded to a halt. Phones came out, held high towards the sky. Then she saw them. 2 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters burst through the cloud cover, matte black and unmistakably military. They flew aggressively low, banking hard over the river, their rotors slicing the air with brutal precision. These weren't news helicopters. They weren't traffic patrol. These were war machines. The downdraft hit the street like a physical blow. Trash cans rolled across the intersection. Umbrellas snapped inside out. A woman screamed as she dropped to her knees. Meline raised an arm to shield her face, the wind ripping at her wet scrubs and nearly knocking the box from her grasp. "What in the world?" she whispered. The helicopters didn't head towards the hospital helipad behind her. They didn't turn towards the airport. They slowed, hovered, directly over the intersection where she stood. Panic erupted. People scattered, shouting and running in every direction. Cars slammed on brakes, horns blaring as traffic dissolved into chaos. Meline didn't run. Years in trauma had trained her otherwise. When everyone else fled, she froze, assessing, watching, calculating. One of the helicopters descended, not on a pad, onto the street. The pilot brought it down with terrifying precision, the skids kissing the asphalt as if it had practiced this exact landing 1,000 times. The rotor spun just feet over the traffic lights, the roar deafening.
The second helicopter hovered overhead, door open, a soldier visible inside, scanning the area. The side door of the landed Black Hawk slid open before the engine even settled. 3 figures jumped out. They weren't police. They weren't SWAT. They wore dark tactical gear with no insignias, rifles strapped to their chests. One of them carried a tablet instead of a weapon. He spun slowly, eyes darting across the terrified crowd. Then his gaze locked on her, the woman in soaked blue scrubs clutching a cardboard box. He pointed, not casually, not uncertainly, directly at Meline Jenkins. Then he started running, straight towards her. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she took an instinctive step back. What did I do? Is this about the hospital? Did Sterling call someone? But even as fear surged, one thought cut through the